Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MB Om podcast. My name is Amanda and I'll be your host for this and all episodes of the show. This episode of the podcast is brought to you in part by Offering Tree. When you're a yoga teacher and you're trying to build your digital presence, it can be daunting. First, you might need a website. There are a lot of great tools for building websites like WordPress, Wix, and Squarespace. Then you need a way to email your students. Again, there are tools for that like MailChimp and Constant Contact, but that's another account to pay for and a password to remember. Then you need a way to schedule and register your students. Again, there are tools for that, but it's another account to create and pay for and another password to remember. Oh wait, how do I integrate my scheduling tool with my website? There are so many things to remember. So instead of putting all of this stuff off for another day because it's too daunting, let me tell you about a better way. Offering Tree set out to make creating your digital presence fun, easy, and affordable. With one account, you can create a website in minutes that has your schedule built right in. They also have email marketing tools to collect email addresses, send newsletters, and automated emails to your subscribers. It all works seamlessly together with one account and one subscription. To learn more about what Offering Tree can do for your digital presence, visit offeringtree.com/MBOM. Offering Tree has been supporting MBOM for close to a year now, and I not only love the product, but I also love the people. The team at Offering Tree is super awesome. They are a small business just like you and me, and they have great customer service for anything that you need. And Offering Tree is providing special pricing for MBOM listeners, so be sure to visit offeringtree.com/MBOM to receive your discount. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you in part by Fave Yogis. The Fave Yogis app is back with new features for teachers that let you create and manage your own private classes while making payment and registration a breeze. Do you have regular private clients? Make life easier with autopay. Forget about remembering to Venmo, or if you're Canadian, try some sort of e-transfer or PayPal combination. You can use autopay to enable repeat payments and keep calendars in sync with classes. Google Calendar integration automatically updates teachers and student classes when you make changes. It's still just your yoga. Teachers add classes, students add teachers, and teachers and students stay connected. So head on over to the App Store on your device and find Fave Yogis. It's FAVYOGIS. On top of that, it's totally free to download and give a try. So head on over to your App Store and find Fave Yogis. FAVYOGIS. Oh, and make sure you use code MBOM and let them know that I sent you. And of course, a huge thank you to Offering Tree and Fave Yogis for supporting the show. And of course, a big thank you to you guys for checking them out. All right, now on to today's episode of the podcast. I am absolutely thrilled to be joined on the podcast today by Tiffany Cruikshank, who is a world-renowned yogi and the founder of Yoga Medicine. And for those of you who are not familiar with Tiffany's work, Yoga Medicine is a teaching platform to educate yoga teachers in a blend of both Eastern and Western models of medicine. And she's designed it to ultimately help students and clients treat and manage things like chronic pain and depression through yoga and meditation practices. And Tiffany has a background in medicinal plant biology and nutrition, a master's degree in acupuncture and oriental medicine, as well as a specialty in sports medicine and orthopedics, as well as she's been a yoga teacher since she was 16 years old, which we're going to talk about more on the podcast. And on today's episode, we dive into Tiffany's story, how she's designed yoga medicine to really bring the modalities of Eastern and Western medicine together, everything she's learned in her business from becoming an international yoga teacher, creating a really successful online business, selling courses and programs online, and ultimately teaching trainings and retreats all over the world. So we cover a lot in this episode, and it was really, really awesome to chat with Tiffany. And I hope that you guys enjoy this as much as I did. Without further ado, here she is. Tiffany, welcome to the podcast today. I'm super excited to have you here with me today.
Thanks for having me, Amanda.
I'm really excited for this conversation. I've followed you on Instagram and followed your work for a while, and also done some of your classes online with Glow Yoga. So really cool to have you here. And there's so much that I want to dive into with the business that you've built for yourself. But let's start by backing up. Can you tell me a little bit about your yoga story and how you first got into yoga?
Yeah, I was actually a troublemaker. I was 14 and my parents sent me off on a wilderness program. And it was just so empowering as a 14-year-old girl, learning kind of to make peace in my body and living in my skin and feeling empowered by learning how to survive. There was an herbalist out there as one of my guides, and he would take me out on plant walks. And I was the only one of the teenagers in our group that was interested. So he was really excited to kind of share that with me. And for me, it just opened this whole other avenue of intrigue with holistic medicine and healing and using our environment, that this idea that our environment has everything that we need, that we have what we need around us. And when I got back, that was a few months long actually. And when I got back, I found an herbalist and apprenticed with him. And I was just so sick of high school because I never felt like I fit in, and I was teased a lot and moved around a lot. And I quickly finished up high school and went off to college, and actually, I guess, rewind a little bit. When I got back from the wilderness program, I saw a little sign that said yoga and a phone number. And I was just really intrigued by it. And so when I was 14, I started going to this yoga class, and my mom had to drive me, and sometimes he would pick me up. It was at a chiropractor's office. And I think everyone else in there was probably in their 60s, but it's hard to tell because your view is skewed when you're 14. But I just fell in love with the physicality of it. I grew up really athletic, and there was always something more, obviously, some depth that I really couldn't put my finger on then. But he invited me to practice at his house. He had some other, I guess you could call them more advanced practices at his house. I didn't know it at the time, but it was more of like a Mysore style Ashtanga, and really fell in love with this silence and breath and you know, curiosity and introspection in the practice. And anyways, I quickly got through college. I knew I was really interested in, and for me, yoga was always an extension of this holistic health modality. And I was really interested in learning more about herbs and holistic medicine, yoga. So I quickly finished my high school at 16 and went off to college. But there really weren't any yoga studios back then, not where I lived in Arizona, not really many that I know of. This was 95, 96, I guess it was. And 96. And so I, on my summer break, decided to go and do yoga teacher training. I remember talking to my teacher on the phone, and I think he was so confused by the thought that I, who had just been doing yoga for 2 years and was 16 years old, wanted to teach. He really didn't offer me any support. So I ended up, anyways, it was before the internet. I ended up at a teacher training, which was, one of two pamphlets that I got, the one that went in my summer break, and then started teaching when I went off to college at 16. And have taught ever since. So that was kind of how it started for me.
Wow, that's incredible that you did all of that at such a young age. I feel like just thinking back to myself at 16, I feel like I was not in tune with anything having to do with like my breath or my body. I think I did like one yoga class. I was a competitive dancer in high school, and I did one yoga class, and I remember being like, this is really weird form of stretching. That was my thought at that age.
Yeah, and I grew up playing competitive tennis and doing a lot of ballet, and don't get me wrong, I still had all my struggles and all these things I was dealing with. By no means was it just like an easy path after that, but I think for me, just kind of trying to find a way to study these things, I think the curiosity in it all and the desire to learn was such a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I'm curious, going into college and then also teaching at such a young age, what was sort of that experience like entering the teaching world and then also the college world while you're still a teenager?
So intimidating. I remember teaching, and one of the first classes I taught was at an armory center in Prescott, Arizona. And it was mostly all housewives, probably in their 40s and 50s. And I remember feeling really intimidated, but also just really excited to share it, especially at the time there wasn't a lot of yoga. So it was a very different place. I mean, I just posted a flyer at the Armory Center, and people showed up, and I was just amazed that, it grew and built. And I remember buying all these Mexican yoga blankets and lugging them because I lived across the street from this Armory Center, and lugging them in this huge bag that I found. And but I loved it. I mean, it was intimidating. I think for me, the curiosity always overrode that. But absolutely, I mean, like anyone, I get nervous speaking in front of a group, especially back then. The only way for me to see through that is just to remember what's interesting, what I'm there for, what my purpose is, what I want to share, what I'm excited about. So, it was tricky, but I was so excited to be in college. I hated high school. I really struggled a lot for a lot of different reasons in high school, partly just because I really was curious about some of these things. And so college was really exciting for me to get to pick and choose and create my future and study. I love being a student. So
Yeah, I do too. Learning is like one of the best things ever. And I think that, a lot of public schools can kind of ruin learning a little bit for us. So I think it's great that you were able to finish that up early and then get into college where you really were able to like enrich yourself. What did you study? You have a background, your college degree is based on something having to do with the body, right?
Yes. I mean, it was basically a botany degree. I did most of my coursework through the University of Arizona, and I did all my pre-med requisites. And my major was technically medicinal plant biology with a focus on nutrition as well. So I got to do all the things I loved, and I also got to apprentice with an acupuncturist as a small part of my coursework, who's also a Buddhist monk who taught me a lot. He worked at the yoga studio. One of the yoga studios I taught at the time, and it was really cool. So I ended up actually my degree is technically through Prescott College. So I got to create my own degree and do all the pre-med stuff I needed and all the botany and put it all together in my own way.
Wow, that's so cool. I love that. I always felt like I have a business degree from a university, from the University of Calgary. And I always felt like, why do I have to take some of these like courses that are so random and not useful to me? I was like, why can't I just kind of like build this how I want? Like I took a world music class, which has not really benefited my life in any big way, but it was interesting. But I was like, there's so many other cool things that I'd love to study that have nothing to do with my business degree, yet I wasn't able to in order to graduate. So it's cool that you were able to build that. I'm curious, like with your yoga teaching at that point, did you ever imagine yourself, I guess where you are today, like in terms of
No. Let's just say no. Yeah, definitely not. Yeah.
At what point do you feel like you saw like a career in your yoga teaching?
Gosh, I mean, for me, yoga was a side job for so long. It was just my passion. And I remember early on saying I didn't ever want to teach yoga as my source of income, as my main source of income, which is really funny how it's ended up now. I think for me, yoga was always my passion. So after I finished my pre-med, I went on to Chinese medicine school. And gosh, I remember taking at one point 13 courses one quarter, or I can't remember if it was semesters or quarters.
That's insane.
And on top of that, I was teaching like 10 classes. I would open the studio and do my own practice at like 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. And then I would teach Mysore every day. And then I would teach lead classes at night. And like throughout the whole day, I would be in classes usually and then studying. I mean, I loved it. It was like I was finally studying what I wanted to study in Chinese medicine school. And so I spent like all my time studying in between. But I remember at one point my mom saying to me, "Why are you teaching so many classes when you know you're going to quit teaching when you get a real job?" and for me, it was never like, I remember laughing. I mean, it was never something I knew I could never explain it to her because this was, early 2000. This was, I started Chinese medicine school. I think it was 2000. It was 2000. And then I just knew it was something I couldn't explain to her. So I didn't try, but I loved it. And, when I graduated from Chinese medicine school, I was still teaching a lot of classes. And so a lot of my patients were yoga people, not necessarily injuring themselves in yoga, but I think also being really proactive to their healthcare. And yoga kind of exposes some of those injuries if we have lingering things in our body. So it was a really great demographic to work with. And the more I used it the more I saw yoga patients who were also yoga students of mine or others, a lot of teachers would refer people to me. The more I realized there was just this thing, like my yoga patients got better a lot quicker than my patients who didn't do yoga. And so I started creating what I called yoga prescriptions, which were just 1 to 2, maybe 3 poses, usually just 1 or 2 poses for my non-yoga patients to do in between sessions, which for me was such a big part of that continued care. My interest was never to be like their sole health modality, but to give them resources to be able to heal themselves as well and, come to me when they really need it. And so yoga was such a big part of that. And I had kind of started some teacher trainings and once I started using that with my patients more, I really started adding that and that really shifted our teacher trainings over the years. And then at some point social media came in and that changed everything. But
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure that your business and what you were doing must have shifted hugely in terms of, I guess, when social media kind of became a big player. I feel like for me, it's kind of interesting because I graduated university sort of like right as, I guess I started university right as social media was becoming popular and graduated right as it was becoming more popular in terms of like using it for business.
mm,
So it was kind of this, I never had a business like before social media, but it's always interesting to hear like how business shifts when all of a sudden it's like, okay, everyone's online and you have to get these Instagram handles. And it's like, I have to get what? I have to do what
mm.
now? Everything was going good without this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my friend Catherine Budig was doing it at the time, and I remember seeing her on there, and I was running teacher trainings, and she was running all these workshops, and I remember refusing to do Facebook for a long time, and then I saw her doing these workshops and traveling, and I thought, well, hey, I feel like I have some really good information that I want to share with people, and so I kind of tested out Facebook and gosh, at the time and it was so new. God, I don't even know what year that was now, but it was so new at the time and it was just such a great platform to connect with people. And as soon as people saw that I was traveling and doing workshops, it all kind of took off from there. As people saw that online. So it was a nice connector. It gave me a nice platform to connect with people all over the world. And at the time I've taught all over and seen patients all over, had some clinics all over, but at the time I started and ran the acupuncture division at the Nike World Headquarters. And so I was their primary acupuncturist and also teaching yoga there. And um, so I was trying to like sneak away on weekends and teach some of these workshops, but then coming back and seeing a full load of 60 plus patients a week at Nike, which is a lot for an acupuncturist. But for me, it was so fun. It was such a nice balance to go and do what I loved on the weekends. Not that I loved acupuncture too, but there's just such different ways. One's giving people resources in their body. The other is kind of being that resource, which to me can be a little bit more draining. I really like to empower people and teach people how to navigate, their own experience, which to me is one of the really powerful parts of yoga.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm curious, and you kind of mentioned this a bit before, like how you started combining like sort of your background in, I guess, Chinese medicine and herbology with the yoga. Is that when yoga medicine was born, or where did that sort of come from in terms of like actually creating your business?
Yeah, I think my specialty has always been sports medicine. So ortho and movement patterns, the physical body. For me, I think one of the things I do really well, both in Chinese medicine as well as in yoga, is bringing some of these traditional modalities down to earth and making them accessible, helping people to really kind of wrap their minds around what's happening and also not completely whitewash it. For me, what we do is really a fusion of East and West, of being able to train our teachers to be able to bring together what we know about all these traditional practices, but also make sure they're meeting the modern day student. And you can imagine, gosh, our yoga practices need to shift and adjust not only to the individual, but to the time. I mean, our modern communities, especially in modern day societies in the US and all over the world, are very different than, what Krishnamacharya was teaching to, and even potentially Patabi Joyce and Iyengar, and even further back, of course. So I think it's so important that we evolve the practice. And for me, the only way I know to do that is to look at blending what I know about the body from a Western perspective, the anatomy, physiology, ortho kind of side of things, and blending it with the traditional practices to be able to suit the individual, because we all know like it's not a straitjacket approach. It just one size doesn't fit all. And for me, I really wanted to train our teachers to be able to understand the body on a deeper level, to be able to find that for themselves, because as a healthcare provider, I knew that the cookie cutter approach just doesn't work. And one of the beauties of Chinese medicine is it is really adaptable. It really is so individualized, and not necessarily just treating symptoms, but looking at the whole person. So I wanted to be able to train teachers to do that. And I knew that that also took a lot deeper understanding of the body. So I started to carve out these longer trainings. And at the time I was in Portland too. And I had a nice network of healthcare providers that I referred to and worked with. And I just found a growing desire in the healthcare community, doctors and other providers, interested, curious, wanting to use yoga. But obviously as a healthcare provider, it's kind of negligent just to, as a yoga teacher, we know to refer someone to yoga because they could end up anywhere. They could end up doing Ashtanga or yin or chanting, or any of which could be helpful for some people and then others not so much. So what I wanted to do was really create a transparent system as a referral source for healthcare providers, and bridge the gap between Eastern and Western modalities through really a model of transparency. I knew the market well. I saw the need. I loved teaching and sharing what I had, and just trying to do what I could to help support the healthcare industry. I think yoga is such a big part of that, even if it's nothing more than just instilling body awareness. I feel like that's so important for your health and well-being, even just to be able to give feedback to your healthcare provider on medications or physical therapy, whatever that might be. So I think it's such an important part of our healthcare. I really and truly believe that to my core. And so for me, it was being able to meet the medical community with this fusion of East and West.
Yeah, that's amazing. This is something that I've thought about quite a bit just on my own personal journey, is kind of like, everything that we have, from Western medicine to doctors to all the ways to take care of ourselves in the West, are amazing in a lot of ways. But then I feel like there's also this just innate wisdom in Eastern philosophies and Eastern medicine.
Mm.
And it's always felt like to me in my own journey that so many people are like, oh, you either go to the doctor or you like go to the naturopath. And it's like, I go to my doctor and my doctor is like, you went to a naturopath. And I'm like, can you just like kind of like work together? Because I feel like together you're doing what I need. Separate, I need both, but together it's great. And I've thought about it a lot. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard thing as an acupuncturist as well, bridging that gap between all the different medical modalities. That's a huge job. But then I saw this and I'm like, I think I can help do this, bridge the gap between yoga, because there's this clear, I think some of it is, I think it comes from a good place. Healthcare providers want to help you, and they don't always know how best to use other modalities unless you're really immersed in it and using it more. And so they're trying to help you, but the beauty of yoga is we're not there to replace their healthcare. We're not there to take over. We're there to work with them and take some of the weight off their shoulders for a lot of these patients who maybe aren't responding well potentially, or chronic pain patients, or there's so many things I feel like don't respond well to Western medicine that often respond really well to Eastern modalities, whether that's yoga or Chinese medicine. And I think back to what you said too, is it's so important to leave space for both the science and the research, which also only tells us so much. It's so limited. It tells us one tiny piece of information about one tiny piece of time, about one tiny demographic, and it doesn't give any other, us any much more than that. But then fusing it with the traditional practices that we know from years of experience have such incredible potency to them, trying to find a way to fuse those together that leaves space for both of them is so important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And I think it's interesting too to think about like the blend with yoga. And this is something I've talked with people about and kind of contemplated, is like, I think it's so great when a healthcare professional can, like a doctor, for example, can say like, hey, yoga would be really beneficial for you, whether it's like diabetes or obesity or anxiety or whatever somebody's going through, they can say, hey, go to yoga. But you brought up a really good point that I've thought about a lot, is like, group classes are so different. And it's like there's a complete difference between if somebody goes to a restorative class or an Ashtanga class and the experience they're going to have and whether or not it's even beneficial for whatever condition they have. And I guess I'm curious, as somebody who's really dove into this, is I think to make yoga more, I guess, like mainstream or popular with health practitioners sending patients to yoga. I think it's like this, we need to bridge the gap of education as to what is actually beneficial about the yoga. So I'm curious, like your thoughts on that, like as yoga teachers, how can we get our services with health practitioners and et cetera?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is the healthcare providers practicing. I really believe that this practice sells itself on the experience. You feel that really quickly. Obviously, there's such a broad span of what's going on in the yoga world, which as always is going to have pros and cons. I think there's so much beauty in the diversity of the yoga practices now. But I think what it requires is either one, the healthcare provider to really understand the yoga practices and be able to maybe refer them to a style or a studio that they know or understand a little bit better, or be able to refer them to a specific person. So we have an online resource of teachers, and it's not meant to be like the one resource, the only one. Hopefully a lot of people will do this, but a resource of teachers they can get on. I've got a shoulder patient. This person's done the shoulder module here. I recommend, check out this person, or maybe they know a teacher in person who might be able to help. We also are just now starting in the new year to launch some courses for doctors to educate them on the different types of yoga practices, as well as, most importantly, give them a firsthand experience of the practice in their own body, as a way to kind of come full circle with what we offer. A lot of what we do is train teachers at yoga medicine, but also now training the healthcare providers. And I see this a lot now too, with the younger generation coming out of medical school, really wanting this and needing this more well-rounded approach to the human body and being more interactive. So I do think it's changing really quickly, actually, in the medical world. But the problem is, like you said, is like, go do yoga. God, just saying that out loud, like, makes you nervous.
It's so vague, right? Like, and as a teacher, it's like, and as a teacher who I guess is not like, I don't have the background that you have. So if I have somebody show up to my class and they're like, I have this going on and it's a group class, that to me is like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to hurt them or harm them, because yoga should be healing, not harming. But like, am I even equipped to teach this? Which is,
well, I think there's so much that the simple practices can do. I mean, I don't necessarily think every yoga teacher needs to know a ton of, they don't need to know everything about the body, but it's what I know. So it's what I teach from, is the Eastern and Western fusion. But I think, gosh, it really does come back to so many of the simple practices we do that can be the most powerful. And we are starting to see that, just a general acknowledgement of how powerful things like meditation and pranayama, how quickly we can change the things like vagal tone and change how the nervous system is, the regulation of the nervous system responses and stress responses. We know that a lot of those can be really simple things. And so it's coming, I think. It's just, it takes a while. And let's be honest, every medical modality has the same issue. You've got to get on there and see who's the right. I get this a lot of times, like, how do I find a good acupuncturist? Well, there's no brilliant guide to it. Honestly, you have to get on, read their bios, go maybe have a visit, see if you're looking for fertility treatments, find someone who specializes in that, or sports medicine, or whatever it might be. And then there's something for everyone, even in a Western medicine perspective. There's such a diversity of approaches, and being able to find a healthcare provider that you click with is so important, I think, and that you believe in. We know the placebo effect is really important too. So obviously we definitely want to get someone we believe in too. I think that's important, but also someone that aligns with how you want to work with your body and what you believe in health-wise. So the issues are there all over. So I don't think it's unique to yoga, but it's challenging, I think, in the healthcare system. I don't think there's an easy solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with all of that. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how it's a good reminder that, like, as a yogi, it's like you kind of forget that not everybody like sits and breathes every day. And for somebody who's like, doesn't do that, that's a really powerful practice. So as yoga teachers, we have that to offer them at the very least.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm really grateful that you're starting to bridge this gap. This has been something that I've been I don't know, just one of those worldly contemplations where I'm like, how do we fix this? How do we fix this big problem that I see
Yeah,
without
and
having
it's
the tools to
happening.
do it?
It's cool to
Yeah.
see it. If you had told me, 25 years ago that we would be where we are now, or I wouldn't have believed you.
Yeah. And you've been a big part of that too. So it's probably cool to see like that you're a part of that wave that's happening right now.
A small part, I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'll make sure that there's links too for all your trainings and stuff in the show notes so
Oh,
that
thanks.
people can definitely go and check those out. Hey, yogis, we're just taking a quick little break from the podcast to talk about PunchPass. PunchPass is everything you need and nothing you don't at a price you can afford. Their software is simple yet powerful, efficient and easy to use. The team at PunchPass knows what it's like to run a small business like yours because they are a small business too. PunchPass understands your challenges and they take pride in delivering great service. When you're with PunchPass, you're not alone. They lift you up and support the connections you have with your client community. They listen, they care, and they're here to support you. So if you're looking for support from easy-to-use software with great people behind it, visit punchpass.com/MBOM to try PunchPass free for 2 weeks. I am super excited to be paired with PunchPass because I think that there's a lot of softwares out there, and sometimes it's really hard to choose what's right. And for me, as a small business, I'm looking for something that understands my needs as a small business. And that's exactly what PunchPass does. They have great pricing options, they have great people, and overall, they're just a really great option if you're a yoga teacher or a small business looking for a great software. So once again, head on over to punchpass.com/MBOM to try PunchPass free for 2 weeks. All right, now back to the podcast episode. Something else I'm curious about is you'd kind of mentioned like, so you're building your business and then, the internet happens and social media happens. I'm curious about that transition from, teaching entirely in person to building, this massive business also online, because I think, like when you go to your website, you have a ton of courses, you're on Glow Yoga, which I've practiced on, and tons of stuff teaching all over the world. Like, how did that shift sort of happen, and what was that like in your business?
I mean, I think nothing really replaces that in-person community. That was really important for me to have that. And that's where a lot of the workshops and things started, because it really builds an intimate connection with people that isn't the same online. However, I do appreciate the importance of online connections. But the online social media and online presence is such an important way of connecting to the larger communities. And for me, it was really just more about trying to share what I'm doing with a larger community of people, in a way that really clearly represented what I think I'm good at, what I enjoy doing, the communities that I work with. Yeah, so for me, and then just putting a lot of time and hard work into that. For me, it's just always been trying to really stay clear in who I am and what's important to me, and not chase shiny objects, and learn how to say no, and quality over quantity, which I think is so important in social media for me, rather than just going for massive likes and clicks. Really sticking to drawing in the people that I think can really benefit from what we're doing or be interested in what we're doing. And for me, I think it's also helped us kind of steer away from a lot of the negativity that can happen online, just by not trying to be everything for everyone. But it does take a lot of time. I mean, really, every business takes a lot of time, and you have to be willing to pour yourself into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you brought up so many good tips there. I'm a big fan of quality over quantity, which I think in like the Instagram, Facebook world where everything is based on likes and comments, it's really hard. Like, it's so easy to get into comparison mode of like, oh, this photo got more likes than this one, and then you start analyzing why it did, and I feel like that could just spiral you into the depths
Yeah.
of something that's not beneficial to you, your life, or your business, really. Like,
Yeah.
we only have so many hours in a day and we have to choose how we spend them. It's like, do we want to spend all of our time looking at like why a photo didn't get as many likes as the one the day before?
And at the end of the day, I mean, it's kind of like, it is such a business resource now too, even outside of the yoga world. When people are hiring or looking to go to a workshop or hire you as a yoga teacher, they look at your social media to get an idea of who is this person. And so it's always like, is what I'm posting a reflection of who I am? I mean, I try not to overthink it. I've definitely put a lot of thought into it over the years, and it's evolved a lot for me. And I have people who help me now, which is really nice. But I look over everything we post now still, and I think for me, making sure we're speaking to our core demographic and serving them is such an important part of that. And yeah, it's easy to get lost in it. And I try not to like ruminate on things or worry about things that aren't doing as well, because I think it's also a small part of a bigger picture too, to show what it is we're doing for people who are new, who come to our page. And I think that's where a lot of people miss it too, is they forget, like, as a yoga teacher, maybe you have a personal page too, but if your full-time job as a yoga teacher, people are really looking at your, your website and your social media pages to really see why they should go to you. It's like, that's how you draw people in. So the more clear you can be at what you do, and maybe that's seeing everything and working with everyone. But if you have a specialty or something that, makes you unique, I think the more clear you can be with that, the more important, that's one of the big things. And when I started doing yoga, teaching in the 90s, it was really just about educating people on why to do yoga. But now there's so many people doing yoga and so many more who want to do yoga who haven't still. There's such a big place for people really specializing and being really clear in what they have to offer. And there's something for everyone. I mean, I don't think yoga medicine is like the end all be all. I think there's so much more to yoga, and there's so many other modalities that are so wonderful and important in what we do. But I think in social media, the more clear you can be with that, and then looking at your pages as a reflection of like, can someone hop on this page and really quickly see in that like brief glimpse that they spend who I am and what I'm good at? And that's, I think, the challenging thing sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's also challenging, particularly with something like Instagram, because everything has to be like a photo and a caption, right? So I think one of the things that I've worked with teachers on the most and contemplated myself and also seen in the Instagram world specifically is like, okay, so if we teach a physical practice and we want to share with people that, then we should share a photo of the physical practice. And I feel like that's just like kind of turned the yoga Instagram world into this like flurry of cute outfits and handstands and things like that, which is fine. Like if that's what you're teaching, that's great. I have nothing against that. I think handstands and cute outfits are great. But I think there's so many people that are like, but that's not what I offer, and nobody's going to like my stuff if I don't post that,
Well, and I think the reality of it isn't so much how fancy the pose is or how pretty the outfit is, but also it just does have to be a nice looking photo, meaning like the clarity of the photo, maybe the symmetry or asymmetry. I think people are kind of redesigning that now, taking a look at and shifting that. People want more than just, a skinny bendy girl in a cute outfit doing yoga or in a bikini or whatever it is, which to each his own. There, if someone likes that, that's cool. I mean, there can be some really pretty pictures in that realm as well, which, is something else. But I think obviously Instagram was made as a visual platform. So yeah, you do have to have nice quality photos for people to want to pay attention usually. Although I think there's something for everyone out there. I think I see all sorts of things happening out there, which is really interesting to see that people are paying attention to a variety of things now and having those conversations. However, I think what a lot of people end up doing is they use the catchy photo to get people's attention and assume that then they're going to read the caption. But and then the caption's about, therapeutics or something, which is really confusing. Well, you just put your foot behind your head, or you're in this crazy deep yoga pose, and now you're talking about therapeutics, which, maybe that is therapeutic for you. My idea of therapeutics in my 20s was different than it is now in my 40s. But I just think making sure it all aligns with who you are is the most important. And again, there's no right or wrong. If you love those deep poses and the challenge, I think there's something to everything for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Somebody asked me recently about if I thought the yoga world was saturated, which I think is a big topic of conversation amongst yoga teachers right now. And I was like, there's 7 billion people on the planet and only a small percentage of them are doing yoga. So in my mind, as yoga teachers, we have lots of opportunity. When every single person's practicing.
Yoga Lines did that survey a few years ago, and I can't remember how many million there were, but there were something in the millions of people who wanted to try yoga still and hadn't. So there's still a lot. And I do think the in quote saturation people are talking about is also the need for you to really get clear on what you have to offer, and maybe finding specific niches, whether that's corporate yoga or a specific corporation that you know or know someone at, or a specific demographic like Parkinson's, or, I think it's really just a need for you to be more creative in what community needs you and how you can serve them, and being creative and finding communities that, need what you have to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And so I'm curious, for anyone out there who's listening who has like a solid in-person business who's looking to maybe take their business online, do you have any tips? And I know we've talked about a couple of these things already, but do you have any other tips that you haven't mentioned for people to get started with kind of building their business online without giving up the in-person stuff?
Mm. Well, gosh, this is where it's funny because my husband's in the business realm and that's what he does. So I'm always like, I don't know business. I've never studied business. I just know my business. Um, and, I would say start where you're at, get a website. And sometimes that means building your own. It might mean getting someone to do it for you or trading. And get a social media page. I think for me the biggest thing is making sure it's a reflection of who you are. I see this over and over and again with our teachers and with other teachers. I'm like, I know this one teacher, I know so many teachers who have really strong gifts and really specific niches that they connect with, but then you look on their online profile and their page and it's just like, it doesn't speak to that at all. And so how are you serving this community of people? When I'm posting, whether it's on our website or usually it's social media. But when I'm posting things, I'm always not necessarily maybe consciously, but thinking about this demographic. I'm naturally, I think, kind of thinking about the people who will read this and benefit from it, and I'm keeping them in mind as I'm writing up these posts. And maybe that's a specific teacher in our trainings, or maybe that's a group of teachers, or maybe that's a demographic, or maybe it's patients that I've worked with who have had this injury, or maybe I'm writing something like I really want to serve the general public. We serve a variety of demographics on our site now, but I'm really trying to keep in mind who is this post for and speak to that specifically and offer these resources. And I think the same thing is true when you're creating a page, social media or web page, is really making sure that if you're that person, can you put yourself in their shoes? Does this speak to them? Does it answer their questions? Does it really show who should be coming to you and why they should be coming to you, and then give them resources. I'm such a big fan of like, give them some resources. And not everyone's going to be able to come to you and go to your trainings or your workshops. But I do think it's important to give back and offer some things to our communities that they can use and access and benefit from without having to spend a lot of money. And I think that's really important as well. And obviously it for the people who have a deeper level of curiosity, maybe potentially brings them to study with you at some point. But I think it's important that it comes from that place of serving the community, because I do think that is an important part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's been one of my biggest, I feel like struggles isn't the right word, but just one of the things with like having, I guess, a business and a podcast around the business of yoga is reminding people that the business side of things doesn't have to be like icky or gross or anything like that. Like,
Yeah.
we can still have great businesses that make sustainable incomes while
Yeah.
still serving our students.
And you have to be sustainable. Otherwise, you don't have anything to offer. For me, I say this over and over in our trainings, like our whole purpose as yoga teachers is to be of service, to offer what we know, to keep learning, to be humble, but to also guide them in this journey, to remember we don't have all the answers. And I think it's really important not to start with the business tips as your focus. A lot of us know this, like, don't come into yoga as a business, but get clear in what you're good at and what the world needs, and then find the business tips to support that. So like, have the thing that you really believe in, that you feel strongly about, that you want to share, have the service, and then find the business stuff to support it. Because if you're not sustainable, it's not going to be helpful to anyone.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like when I started teaching, it was in a community that does have a lot of yoga teachers, and I was very much in the mentality of like, oh, it's super saturated. I'll never get like a studio opportunity, so I'll just say yes to everything that I can, which I think is a great way to start out teaching.
Yeah.
Like you don't have any experience, so of course you should say yes. And I
Yeah.
taught for free for a long time, and then after a couple of years and gaining more experience elsewhere, I was like, okay, well, I don't really feel like I want to teach all my classes for free anymore. I'm fine doing like some community stuff, but there needs to be some reciprocal something here. Otherwise, I can't keep doing this because I have to keep a job on the side.
Yeah, I remember working at a struggling studio. It was probably early 2000, 2002 or something like that in Portland. And, most of our classes had like 4 to maybe 10 students in them, which was normal. And I remember I was in Chinese medicine school at the time. And so I was like, and I had friends in chiropractic and naturopathic and Western medicine medical school. And I was like, I'm going to do a student discount. And I talked with the studio owner and we went through all the details of how I would get paid and blah, 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 blah. But anyways, we offered, it was $5 for students. And within, I think just a few months, it was the student rate just for my classes. And I had the whole room was packed. We had, I think it held maybe 35 people at the top. But it was packed and it was great. It was great for the studio in the end. And it was great experience for me. And I felt like I really got to help people who I understood too, with having all the students in there, which was great. It was a demographic I knew. I knew where to put the flyers. Yeah, it was fun too.
I love that. And I think this is a good segue into the Seva Foundation that you have created. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, when I soon after I started running our teacher training, so I didn't jump on the Yoga Alliance bandwagon until I think it was 2008, and then soon after, I felt like I really wanted to offer a service component to it. I grew up working in my mom ran a homeless shelter, and I grew up working there, and so I really believed in the importance of giving back, and my internship through Chinese at the end of my Chinese medicine school. Had the opportunity to work at a domestic violence shelter and a drug and alcohol center and a couple other places. And not only was it really important, I think, to learn how to work with and serve different demographics, but also I'm selfishly also putting your life and your world in perspective too. It's such an important thing. And I think as a yoga teacher, we put so much pressure on ourselves these days. As you mentioned before, we've got to have websites and social media. It's not as easy as just like posting flyers somewhere like it used to be. Um, but there is still so much opportunity there, but it's you really have to love what you do. And so I think for me, the service work that we do puts everything in perspective. It's the Yoga Medicine Seva Foundation. And as a woman who is educated, and whether that be a university setting or a yoga setting or whatever that might be, I felt really drawn to giving back to other women. And then specifically India, this culture that's given us the gift of yoga. When I worked at Nike, they had the girl effect, and I was really intrigued by it. They had this little infographic video, which really eloquently described, and it's not there anymore. I've looked for it, but eloquently described the cycle that happens where girls are trafficked, but then basically have to stay in that cycle to, they get pregnant and then they have to support their baby, or there's a lot of different circumstances, obviously, that can happen. But for me, part of breaking the cycle was not just having a center. So we have a shelter right outside of Delhi that houses about 100 girls, but not just food and shelter and medical, but yoga, which to me is an empowerment tool, but really even more importantly, is giving them meaningful vocational skills that bring them above the poverty line. So a lot of the shelters will teach them things like spice grinding, which just kind of keep them below the poverty line. Or just have one vocational option that everyone does. And we really try hard to pair them up with a vocational skill of their choice. Obviously, there's always some limitations. Some want to go to college. We've got one girl in law school. We've got girls who will go on to become goldsmiths. We have a company we work with that does jewelry, Her Future Coalition, which is one of the most highly revered professions in India, as a goldsmith, which takes about 5 years and is all men really who do it. So It's a really
Wow.
huge thing for them to be able to do, and just seeing the look on their faces, it's such a rewarding thing, but also it started out as something for our teacher trainings of wanting to kind of help our teachers grow in a different way. But really kind of we've turned away from that, and it really is using these larger communities that we have at Yoga Medicine to support this ongoing functioning of this shelter that we have in Delhi now. So we have $150,000 as our goal. Last time we raised 100. So we do this every 2 years to keep it running. So we're almost halfway through. January we'll be halfway through. And every 2 years we take a trip down there to visit. Obviously, if you're sending $150,000 to India, you want to see where it's going. And most people make a breadwinner salary in India would be $500 a month. So it's much more efficient for us to send $150,000, get a whole staff, get a crew, building, repairing, running things, than it is to fly people down there to do work. So most of what we do is actually go and visit, and it means so much to them for us to make that huge trip there. It's so important to take those photos back to the donors, to get the inspiration going, to get the support that we really need. There's so much more to it, but it's such a huge need. And on the main road there's I think 150 brothels. Each one have about 200 girls that see probably 20 people a day. It's mind blowing when you look at the statistics. It's such an organized operation too for us to infiltrate it and rescue a girl. It takes quite a bit of effort to be able to actually rescue them from these shelters, even though they are right in the open because prostitution is legal there. Anyways, it's a long story, but for me as a woman, it's so important to empower these women in an industry that I can't even wrap my head around. There in India too, I know it's an issue. It's all over really, but being able to mobilize our communities in a culture that really cares, and then also as a yoga teacher, provide some perspective, and as a human being, really provide some perspective, which is the ultimate. I guess, way to melt any stress in your life, the perspective that it gives us. So,
yeah. No, I love that. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think it's incredible that you're doing that. You already have so much on the go. I can imagine that, your time is split in many ways. So I think it's really great that you're putting time into doing this too.
Yeah, just as a quick side note too, for anyone, if people want to get involved, if anyone who raises $5,000 before our next trip is invited to come, so all your expenses are paid other than your airfare, and visit the shelters, and it's such a life-changing experience. And it's been really cool too, because we've had a lot of people speak up, and studio owners who do, by donation on the off hours when they wouldn't normally be having classes, all of a sudden finding that they're drawing all these new students into their studio, which wasn't the purpose of offering it. Or teachers, now traveling and teaching workshops by donation, and now connecting to all these new demographics of students who wouldn't normally have access to their class, and so many other different ways to raise the money. And so if you're interested, there's a lot of different ways on our site.
Awesome. And what's the website for that?
Oh, everything's on yogamedicine.com, but we have a Yoga Medicine Seva Foundation link on the menu bar there.
Okay, cool. I'll make sure there's a link specifically for that so that people can check it out. And then your trip to India is happening in 2021, right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So that's lots of time to raise $5,000 if you're interested in going.
Yeah.
Amazing. Something that I'm curious about, and I was looking at your teacher training programs and kind of, where you are all over the world. And one of the things that I really love about the way you've set up your training is that you can take these different workshops all over the place. And I'm curious, how do you decide on where to go and where to offer the different parts of your programs? Because, looking at your schedule for 2019, 2020, you are literally all over the place.
Yeah. It's a balance. I mean, I think I'm always juggling with that, but we try and get over to Europe area a couple times a year, Australasia area a couple times a year. And then our community does like to travel a little bit. So a lot of times we'll find one fun exotic location, like next year is Iceland. And then we do a lot of trainings in the US. And now we also have some workshops we've launched with some of our teachers who have done a lot of training, some of what we call our yoga medicine therapeutic specialists who have done a lot of trainings with us, offering workshops on some of our key components of the different things we offer, myofascial release and shoulder, hip, spine, kind of some of the key components to I guess therapeutic practice is such a is a tricky word, but to things that can help support you in your practice, regardless of what style of practice you have. Um, but yeah, it's a balance. I mean, I think there's with the internet and social media, it is tricky because it connects you to all these places. And um, gosh, I've had to learn how to say no and how to pick what's best, which sometimes there's never a right answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking at the schedule, just being like, I wonder, if your path is crossing mine at anywhere in the future. And I was like, man, you're like Europe, US, Asia, back to Europe. And then I was thinking about just wondered how you pick those places, because there's so many amazing places in the world. So I'm not surprised that there are lots of places that you would want to choose from, but it's hard to narrow that in and then decide like what's a good place for the community. But I love that your community is full of travelers. As a fellow traveler myself, I think that that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah.
And so linking it back to the business of yoga, do you have any final business tips for anyone listening based on what you've learned through your career?
Oh my gosh, I feel like I have so many. Let's see. I think the biggest thing I say to people all the time is it's kind of like a triangle. If you can find, what you're good at, what are your strengths, what are you really passionate about, which is another corner of the triangle, and then also what the community needs. To find where those 3 points intersect, I think is a really powerful thing. And then just being clear on your demographic and speaking to that and being patient enough, putting in the hard work and being patient enough to see that through. Um, I know for me, yoga teaching was never about making money or being well known. And I think it's a tricky thing to come into yoga for, because it is really a profession that's about giving back and being of service, though now you can make money in it and make a name for yourself. Those things are happening. But for me, that was kind of just a natural evolution. It wasn't something I sought out to do. But as my business grew, eventually I went from seeing patients full time and using that money to really support my yoga business, which could be any profession. I think having a side gig is really helpful as a yoga teacher. But eventually it grew, and I allowed it to kind of evolve with a lot of hard work into what it is now. But I think the big part of that was being clear in what I have to offer, not being distracted by things that sound really exciting and fun, not trying to do everything, not trying to be everything for everyone, but really knowing what I'm good at, what I have to offer, and how it can fit the needs of the community. So you can imagine too, with my teaching in yoga medicine, it's constantly evolving. I don't know that I sit down and go, this is where I want to be in 10 years. I definitely have a lot of goals, and that's changing daily, weekly, yearly for sure. The long-term goals are harder for me though, because I do think there's a natural evolution to any business that requires you also keeping your finger on the pulse to see what it is that people need, because things change very quickly. Our needs change. And so I have to be able to be flexible enough to meet that, and really keep asking the question, how can I help? What do I see? If you are someone who has a corporate job as well, like what are you sensing that those people need? How can you serve these communities that you know? And trying to find a way to carve out your niche and knowing that that's constantly going to change. I think a lot of times when I mentor people, it's like, but I'm not really sure yet. That's okay. Find it as what you really love now, and know that that can slowly shift or maybe quickly shift over time as you get clearer and clearer. For me, that's something I've gotten better at too, is really understanding what I'm good at and what my limitations are, and bringing in teachers and medical providers to fill in the gaps of what I'm not good at. I think I'm really good at delegating, and I'm really good at not trying to have answers for everything, of knowing that I'm not good at a lot of things, and being able to find people who can do that, and then offering those opportunities to them as well. As a yoga teacher before I had my business, that was also things like referring students to other teachers that might be more helpful to them, and knowing that as I refer people out, somehow it all works out. I know it sounds so cliche, and we all know that, it's all going to come back to you. But the reality is you enter into these reciprocal relationships that isn't about who wins or who has the most students or making the most money, but it's really about finding the best fit for the student, And I think ultimately when we lead from that place of service, a lot of the business stuff fits into place, though obviously we need to be sustainable and 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 keep working really hard. And that's where I do think at the beginning as a yoga teacher, having a side job, for me it was my medical practice. For others that might be a corporate gig or a photography or whatever. I mean, there's a million things. And especially if you can support your teaching or get your foot in a door of a demographic that might benefit from your teaching. The other thing I'd say is don't be afraid to reinvest. I've poured so much of my money back into my business because I love it. I believe it's one of the secrets to why I've done so well. I think being unafraid to take risks and invest in what you do is so important. Obviously, when you're just starting off, you've just got to make it sustainable. But as you start to get some traction, don't be afraid to pour some of that money back into what you're doing to get to that next phase of growth. I think it's so important to keep investing, and maybe that's investing in your own education, which for me is kind of the baseline of teaching. My passion really comes from the fact that I do invest in my own practice, and that might look really different in different days of the week or in different years of my life. And I love that. I think that's wonderful. I think the times I've struggled the most is when I've thought my practice had to be a certain way. But finding ways to connect to that, not only because it's a busy life. If you're building any sort of business, it takes a lot of work, especially in the beginning. And so not only do I need to take care of myself, we all know the importance of self-care, but also really where we draw our inspiration from. And, remember, I think for me, and I can only speak from my experience, but getting more clear and more clear and more clear and continuing to refine what it is you're good at, what it is you like, what it is that the world needs from you, how you can be of service. And then just finding business tips to support that is just so important, I think, in the sustainability of it too. And I think it's such a big part of it. For me, my business has evolved so much from running teacher trainings out of my house in 2002 to now running them worldwide and from like 4 or 5 people in my trainings in my house to now, I think we had 80 in this last training, usually 60 to 100 people in our trainings now all around the world, and a large community of teachers around the world, thousands of teachers that we have. And it doesn't happen in one moment, but it requires just taking one step forward. I personally didn't set out to be where I am right now, but it has evolved and has really come from a passion and a desire to really help people. And I think that's where a lot of what I put out there comes from, whether that's working with patients or with students, seeing the needs, seeing the common injuries or the common struggles or misinformation or just things that I think can be really beneficial or helpful for people. And I think keeping it on a positive note, at least for me, is really important too, to draw those people who appreciate and enjoy what you do rather than the people who come because they don't like other people. But that's just a personal preference. For me, with what we do, it's always keeping an open mind that there's so many different approaches to yoga, all that have an important place. And if I speak from my opinion and my experience, there's really no right or wrong. And so what I love doing is having a platform where everyone can contribute and speak from that and learn from each other's experience. It's such a powerful thing. And so I guess the last thing that I would say, the business side, is so important is community, being able to find a way to connect to your community and support your community. And really, it's everything I've mentioned already, being really true to what it is you're good at and really clarifying that on your website and your social media and sticking to that. But I think building community is such a powerful thing. And it's one of the things I love most about yoga medicine is the people we draw. And one of the things I think I love about our community is that it is a really curious group, people who are really dedicated to learning more, but also still really humble and open-minded, which is such an important thing, I think, as a yoga teacher. And so I love our community, which has evolved over the years, which there's so many of them. Yoga is such an important way for us to connect through our communities, to realize that we don't have to do it all. We don't have to be it all. Find people you can support and work with. It's such an important part of keeping that sustainability as well. So, so many things.
Yeah.
And remember, I think it's important to leave with this positive note. And you mentioned too of like how negative things can be around the yoga world, around how hard it is. It is hard, but it was hard back in the 90s too. I mean, we were always trying to convince people why they should do yoga, and there was so skepticism. It was like my parents always thought I was in a cult, and just finally now I think they've started to realize it's not. But I think there's so many benefits to that. There's all these things that are easy to like see as negative things, as distractions to maybe the traditional practices or whatever it is you're interested in. But I think the more people we have doing yoga, the better. And hopefully, I know for me, I started out running trainings near a studio that kind of really cranked people out. A lot of their trainings were them just taking classes at the studio. And so, but it was perfect. I remember first seeing it and being like so negative about them cranking out all these yoga teachers who didn't really know much about yoga. But then they all just kind of fed into my teacher trainings because they wanted to learn more. So I think it's just important to remember there's so much opportunity out there as a yoga teacher to stay positive and to keep looking for ways to support a community that that you feel you can be helpful to, and just being creative about how you can do that. Think outside the box, be crafty, be resourceful, talk to people who have a foot in the door at maybe a company that you want to teach yoga for, or whatever that might be. But it does require some dedication and diligence. And knowing that there is a place out there. If you're willing to, if you're just looking to come into yoga to make money, you might want to just go somewhere else. But, but if you love it, we all know yoga is such a fulfilling career. It's such an incredible way to help the lives of other people. For me, it's so rewarding to see it all come around, but it's not for the faint at heart. And it's definitely not something you go into just to make money, because it's a path, right? But if you can be committed to it and know what you're good at, there's for sure something sustainable, rewarding, and enjoyable there for you. If you can be patient.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a quote that I don't know if this is the exact wording, but it says something like all good things in life you have to work for, essentially. And I always come back to that when things feel hard. It's like, would this be worth it if it was just super easy? It's like, no, it's worth it because it's hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just so impressed with where the yoga industry is now. Like I said, I would never have guessed it would have grown to this extent. So I just think there's so much opportunity there of people eager to learn and aware of all the benefits potentially that yoga, or maybe even just some of the benefits maybe, but that it can be helpful to their lives. And yeah, I just think it's a really great time to be in yoga, even though, there's always positive and negative out there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love all of that. Thank you so much for sharing all of those tips. I was over on the other side of the phone, just nodding my head along like, yes, I fully agree. And I love everything that you said. So thank you for sharing that. And I could keep you on the phone all afternoon. Obviously, you have other things to go do. So I will wrap this up. But this has been so awesome connecting with you. So thank you so much for your time today, Tiffany.
Thanks. I hope it's helpful for people. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned yogamedicine.com as kind of the internet hub for people. Where is there anywhere else people can go to find out anything about you, your trainings, offerings, all that good stuff?
Yeah, yogamedicine.com. And then we're on all the social media platforms. If you look up Yoga Medicine on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, we're all over those, trying to also give you guys lots of free resources to keep you guys inspired and excited to teach and share what you have.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tiffany.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, that's the episode with Tiffany Cruikshank from Yoga Medicine. Make sure you head on over to yogamedicine.com to learn more about Tiffany, her courses or programs, and all of her offerings. If anything from this episode resonated with you and what you're looking to achieve in your business, or what you sort of believe in your yoga teaching or practice, as always, you can find links and notes from the episode on my website at mbomyoga.com. You can also find posts and everything that's new and exciting over on Facebook and Instagram at Mastering the Business of Yoga. You can also join the private Facebook community at Yoga Business Badasses. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.